If your English answers are always short, it might not be because you've got nothing to say. It's more likely to be because short answers feel safe. You answer quickly, you can avoid mistakes, and you escape the conversation before things get too difficult. But the problem is, short answers can make you seem a bit uninterested, even when you're not. They can make you feel like a smaller version of yourself in English, and they can stop real conversations from developing. So today, we're talking all about how you can speak for longer in English without rambling, because the goal is not to give long, complicated answers. The goal is to give answers with enough detail, enough structure, and enough connection that the conversation actually goes somewhere. So let's get cracking. Welcome to the BritSpeak Pod, the podcast designed to help you feel more confident when you communicate in English. Hey up, mate. How you doing today? I'm not too bad. Thanks for asking, and welcome to episode 114 of the BritSpeak Pod, where today we're talking all about how to speak for longer without rambling in English. If you're new around here, my name is Dan. I'm a CELTA qualified British English teacher and communication coach, and my goal is to help you communicate more confidently in English. And to help you do that, don't forget you can get my free workshop called Stop Struggling, Start Speaking, using the link in the description. It's totally free, and it'll help you improve your English speaking skills. So what are you waiting for? So today then, we're talking all about how to give longer answers, right? Now, a lot of people, they don't have the problem where they speak too much. Maybe in your native language, you speak a lot. I know I do. But in English, lots of people don't do that. They do the opposite, right? They give really, really short answers. And I understand why people do this, right? You give short answers because it feels safe, basically. If you give a short answer, there's way, way less chance that you're going to make a mistake. We all hate making mistakes. It's scary. It makes us look stupid. So we want to avoid that. That makes sense. The shorter the answer, the less chance of making a mistake. It makes sense, right? Also, if your answer is very short, there's way less stress on your communication skills, and your brain is way less overwhelmed because there's less going on, right? So you're kind of protecting yourself in a way. And that also leads to you being able to escape from conversations as quickly as possible, right? If you give a short answer, you can end that interaction as quickly as possible. The stress is finished, back to normal. Okay, cool. Another reason this might be happening, though, is that you struggle to process longer answers in real time. Maybe you've got lots of stuff that you want to say, but you feel like you don't have the ability to actually say that kind of thing. So you make a really short, condensed version that you can say that, you can express that idea. But deep down, you want to be able to say the longer version, but you just don't feel capable. So rather than try, which is very vulnerable and quite stressful, I'll just say the easy version, and then that's fine. It's not what I want to do. It's not really who I am, or, it's not the full value I can provide, but, it's better than nothing, so I'll just do that, right? So I understand why people kind of stick to these short answers. And I was the same in Japanese for a long time, so I understand, right? But there's a bigger problem under the surface with doing this. If you only ever give short answers, it's going to kind of make people think that you're not interested in speaking to them. If everything is a one-sentence answer, they're going to think, this guy's not interested in talking to me. And over a prolonged period of time, people will start to not really speak to you. Maybe they'll not ignore you, but they'll not try and include you in conversations. That can be very isolating, especially if you're in another country, or, you're at work and suddenly everyone's having a conversation and you're kind of excluded from it because people think you're not interested in talking to them. That's a big problem, right? Another problem is that you've got all these ideas, especially at work, you've got all this information, you're very, very good at your job, but you can't show that to people. you're unable to express these ideas. You're unable to show people what you're capable of, which in the short term kind of sucks. But in the long term, it can cost you promotions. It can mean that people don't choose you for projects, and your career can kind of get left behind because you're not able to show people what you're capable of, because you always stick to the short answers, right? Or another one, and I really felt this, is you can't feel like yourself in your second language. For me, Japanese, like for the longest time, I had this feeling that the English version of me and the Japanese version of me were almost like different personalities, right? You know, in English, I like to joke around. I like to have fun. I'm very expressive of my ideas. And, you know, because I'm from the North, I quite enjoy swearing and things like this, right? In Japanese, I wasn't able to do any of that stuff. So my personality in Japanese was far more reserved and far more safe. And it wasn't who I really was, right? And I really struggled to feel like myself in Japanese for a long time. I'm not perfect now. I'm better than I was, but I've still got a long way to go. So those problems are only made worse by the fact that you stick with the short answers because it feels safe, right? So I understand why you're doing it, but the problems are very, very severe if we don't fix them. So with that said, how do we actually start giving longer answers? Because one danger is that when you feel you need to speak for longer, usually people ramble. And you know what this is they'll kind of start speaking with no plan, no structure, and they'll just add details. They'll go off on a tangent. They'll talk around in circles. They'll say the same thing 5 or 6 different ways because that's more information, even though it's the same information in different words. And that can also be the other end of the problem. You probably know somebody in your real life that when they try and tell you something, it takes them 10 minutes, 3 stories, 12 examples, and you waste 20 minutes on something that should take a minute, right? Everybody's got a mate like that just rambles on and on and on and on and on. And you're like, come on, mate, get to the point. I've got a meeting tomorrow morning, hurry up. Like that's the other end of the spectrum. We don't want that either, right? What we're looking for is a way to speak for longer, give more information, show more of your personality in English without just going off the other end and just telling everybody your life story every time they ask you a question, right? So the way I see it and the way that worked for me is that you've got to add a couple of things, okay? The first thing is we've got to learn to expand our answers. It's not enough to give a short answer. Yes, I think so. That's not enough. We need to expand on the idea, okay? Now, there are a bunch of ways to do this. Frameworks are very good for this kind of thing. There's a bunch of different frameworks you can use. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you'll know I'm a big fan of what we call the PrEP framework. The PrEP framework is basically a way of expanding your answer when you're, doing things like giving your opinion or giving your preference or explaining an idea. PrEP is very useful to expand how much detail you give, make it easy to understand and easy to follow for the other person, as well as reducing the pressure on yourself to speak because you've got a plan in your head before you even start speaking, right? So just if you're not aware, the PrEP framework, it stands for point, reason, example, point. And the way this works is you express the main idea, the point, then you give a reason for that point, why, then you back up that reason with an example to make it easier to understand, and then you say the point again because that's the most important thing, right? So learning frameworks like PrEP really help you expand your answer without just saying everything. It's still structured, it's still easy to follow, it's more information, you can give more detail, and it's easy to do because you've got a set plan in your head, right? So if you want to give longer answers, PrEP is a very, very important part of that. Not just PrEP, any frame, there's a bunch of different frameworks, but that's one that for today, and as an example, I'll show you an example in a bit. Yeah, so learning to expand your answers, very, very important. Take the same concept, make it bigger. Give more information, jobs are good in. The other thing is when you start expanding your answers, you can't just talk in one giant 5-minute block, right? Without coming up for air at least once every couple of minutes, So what we tend to do as native speakers is we break it up a bit. And every now and then, we check that the other person is following what we're saying, right? I just did it then, right? We ask these kind of questions like, do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Right? And what we're doing here is we're just kind of checking in with the other person. Are you following? Does this make sense to you? So I'll say a full sentence, and then I'll get to the end and I'll say something like, do you know what I mean? I'm not really asking them a question. I'm just kind of pausing and making sure that they're still engaged. This is really important because it breaks it up. It feels like it's a conversation, not a lecture. So that's really important as well. These little concept checking questions every now and then, every few sentences. And when you get to the end as well, you should be giving the conversation back to the other person. You shouldn't just end. You should be using a follow-up question, which is a question that's designed to keep the conversation moving, but giving the conversation to the other person. It's their turn to speak, right? The easiest way that I can explain this, how about you? I express my opinion, I express what I think, and then when I've got to the end, I ask for your opinion. This is a follow-up question. So this combination of concept checking and making sure the other person is following and ending on a follow-up question really keeps things moving, and it shows the other person that you're interested in actually communicating with them, which is really important, right? So that's another thing that I strongly recommend that you spend time learning. Now, the last thing that I think will really help you is sometimes we have to express more than one opinion. Maybe we have an opinion about something, but then there's also the other side of it, and we want to express both points. Maybe it's not clear. Maybe somebody says, do you like rock music or rap music? And you actually like both. And you kind of need to express that. Maybe there's different reasons that you like both. So when we have these kind of situations where we're talking about one thing, but we want to talk about a related thing that's not exactly the same, we can use transitional expressions to keep things moving. A great example of this is something like, well, on the other hand, for example, something like, I really like Japanese food. It's really delicious. It's very affordable. For example, I can go to the sushi place at the bottom of the road and it'll cost me about £5 for a decent meal, right? But on the other hand, there are some things that I really miss from England. Fish and chips is not something I can really get in Japan. And every time I go back to England, I like to go to my local chip shop. Something like that. So I'm expressing one idea, but I'm also expressing another idea, and I'm linking them together with these kind of transitional expressions so people know what's going on. So on the other hand is a fantastic example of this. Having said that is also a great example of these kind of expressions. So if you want to expand your answers or your ability to speak for longer in English, these three things are very, very useful. Expand your answers using frameworks like PrEP, use concept checking questions and follow-up questions to keep things moving, and transitional expressions to link ideas together that are maybe opposing or related but not exactly the same. All of those things will help you develop more detailed conversations, give the person you're speaking to more conversational threads that they can latch onto to keep a conversation going and help you connect deeper, and just generally help you organize your ideas in real time, right? I'll give you an example of all of this stuff together. Let's imagine somebody asks me something like, Dan, do you prefer living in the countryside or in the city? Something like that. And before, maybe my answer would be something like, yeah, I like living in the city. It's fun. Very short, very concise. There's no mistakes, but there's not really many conversational threads there, is there? So afterwards, maybe my answer could be a bit more complex. Something like, Well, I actually prefer living in the city because there are so many things to do. For example, I love visiting all of the museums and galleries in my free time, right? But, on the other hand, I do miss the countryside because it's a bit more laid back. There are less people around and the scenery is so beautiful. Do you know what I mean? So for me, I think I prefer living in the city, but how about you? Which do you prefer? Now, let's talk about the answer. Let's break it down a little bit because none of that was complex. There was no academic vocabulary. There's no crazy grammar. It was still very simple. I just expanded on that simple idea. The ideas were short. I prefer living in the city because there are things to do. For example, museums and galleries. But I miss the countryside. It's more calm, less people, scenery is beautiful. They're not big ideas, but they're well organized. They're short, but they follow a framework. They follow a pattern that's easy for the other person to understand. I constantly checked in. I like visiting museums and galleries in my free time, right? Or the scenery is beautiful. Do you know what I mean? I'm constantly keeping the other person engaged while making things easy to understand. And I ended with a question to keep things moving. How about you? Which do you prefer? That is the kind of thing I'm talking about. It's not rocket science. It's not a life story. It's not an essay. It's not a keynote speech from Apple. It's just expanding on the basics. So why don't you give it a go? When this video's finished, ask yourself, do you prefer going on holidays to a resort or taking a city break? Try and answer using some of these ideas, okay? Expand your answers with prep. Try to add concept checking or follow-up questions and transitional expressions if you've got ideas that maybe don't quite match. Give it a go. Try to talk for 30 seconds, 1 minute. If you can, record yourself on your phone and listen back to it and see if it makes sense, right? So that's what I would recommend. And, I just also want to say that speaking is hard. Let's be honest. Out of all the skills, speaking in English is the most difficult. And it's probably more difficult because most people don't really know why they struggle to speak in English. And that's why I've made a free training workshop. It's called Stop Struggling, Start Speaking. It's about 30 minutes long. It's a training video that it'll show you why you struggle to speak English. It'll show you why you feel stuck. It's also going to tell you what you need to become a confident communicator in English and give you the first steps so you can start fixing it today. It's totally free. You don't have to pay anything for it. The link is in the show notes. So go down there, click it now, pop your email in. I'll send it you straight away. And it's by far the best thing you can do to get started with improving your English speaking skills. It's a new updated version. I literally updated it this week. So if you've watched the old one, maybe you want to check the new one out as well. But yeah, hopefully you'll find that very useful. And this episode has helped you understand how you can speak for longer without rambling. But that's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I'll be back again with another one really soon. But until then, look after yourself, mate. See you there.